having the arrival prayer here at the National Cathedral delivered by Marion Buddy, who's the Bishop of Washington. Let's bring in John Meacham, who has a wealth of knowledge about the liturgy coming up, the Episcopalian liturgy, which is going to be sprinkled in, of course, with like a Jesuit giving the homily. But mainly, tell us about is this broad church Episcopalianism? How would you describe this service coming up, John?
This is broad church. It will feel very high church because of the setting. But one of the remarkable gifts of Anglicanism from the 16th century forward has been the theological idea, and it's manifested in the service, that we are all God's children. And so this is what will happen to me someday, what will happen to any soul who is buried in the church is received by the ordained priest. We're acknowledged that it's dust to dust, that we come from dust, and to dust we shall return. And it's an appreciation of the great gifts of the individual, but also this is the church universal. And the prayers you will hear will have special resonance, but they will also be repeated endless times, countless times around the world.
It will have, from my experience, tell us, it will have an Elizabethan feel to it in the rhythms of the music, or how would you describe what's going to come?
It will. The language from the prayer book, the Book of Common Prayer, which is one of the great achievements with Shakespeare, with Milton, it shaped the language for centuries. It will feel a little old-fashioned, but that's the church that Senator McCain grew up in. Remember, he went to boarding school at Episcopal High School in Alexandria, Virginia. He, as a prisoner in Hanoi, he was the chaplain of his cell block and would repeat liturgy he remembered from the old boarding school days. The first hymn we will hear is one that will be familiar to most Americans with a familiarity with history, which is the Navy hymn, Eternal Father, Strong to Save. It's a Victorian hymn, both adopted by the Royal Navy and by the United States Navy. It's where the phrase restless wave came from, which Senator McCain used as the title of the last book. It was sung by Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt in August of 1941, when they were meeting secretly at sea to plan how to defeat tyranny. It was sung at President Kennedy's services. I remember Daniel Patrick Moynihan remembering that his central memory of those terrible days in November was that everyone in Washington suddenly knew all the words to Eternal Father, Strong to Save. But when you have the other thing as this unfolds, and when the Jesuit preacher rises to give the homily in the pulpit, remember that's called the Canterbury pulpit. It's where Martin Luther King delivered his final Sunday sermon on the same day that Lyndon Johnson decided and announced to leave the 1968 presidential race. The last time Dr. King preached to a Sunday service was in this cathedral, and he used the central insight that the arc of a moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And his voice echoed through this cathedral. It's also, and I'm thinking about President Bush sitting there now, George W. Bush, this is in some ways the moment and the place he became president. And at the terrible service after the attacks on the Friday service, before he went to Ground Zero,
Right.
He said we are in the
I agree
middle
with
hour
you.
of our grief.
I agree with you about that, John. And that was when he stood with the firefighter and said, we're going to get the people that broke down these buildings. Let me go to a man who knows about war and war fronts. That's Richard Engel. Richard, thank you, because I think one thing we think about John McCain in these moments is what it was like with him out in the front, that he spent so much time with the troops. He was a warrior among warriors. Tell us about you witnessing that.
So he was someone who would always show up in hot spots and war zones, often with very little fanfare. He would come to visit the troops. He was a big supporter of the troops, but he also supported their mission. A lot of politicians say they're patriotic and they support the troops. He was a true believer that the United States had a moral responsibility to intervene. And if you look at what has happened today, he left the Capitol, that brief stop at the Vietnam Memorial where he spent so many years as a prisoner of war, being abused. And I think that experience left him allergic to bullies at home, bullies abroad, and his belief was that the United States, as a superpower, needed to use its power to stand up to bullies. And one of the pallbearers today is Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was an opponent of the Putin regime, someone who was poisoned twice, he believes, at the behest of Russian intelligence. So someone who believed that the United States should act, and that had sometimes mixed consequences. He was a big supporter of the U.S. intervention in Libya. I remember seeing him in Libya. He wanted the United States to act more forcibly in Syria. He was a big advocate of the Iraq War, although later in life he wrote that the Iraq War, in his opinion, was a mistake.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.